I did not receive any help from my family, but after working hard for a career, my family obliged me to give my new house, which I had been building for so long, to my brother. Hey Reddit, so here's my story, and fair warning, it's probably going to sound like the plot of some bad reality show. I'm a 26-year-old guy, and while I won't say I've had the hardest life, it hasn't been easy either. My family wasn't rich growing up, so I learned early on that if I wanted something, I'd have to work for it myself. I've always been the independent one in the family, and that's shaped who I am today. By 18, I was out of the house, juggling work and school, scraping by to make rent, and just trying to get through each day without going under. I did whatever I could to get ahead, working weekends, picking up odd jobs, and putting every spare dollar into savings. Fast forward a few years, I'm now in a solid career, and after scrimping and saving, I finally managed to buy my own house. It's a modest place, but it's mine, and I take a lot of pride in it. I've been slowly fixing it up room by room, turning it into a space that really feels like home. But apparently, my family had other plans for my future, and my house, that they never clued me in on. So, here's the setup. I have a half-brother, Jake, who's 24. Jake is my mom's son from her second marriage, and let's just say he and I have had pretty different lives. Jake has always been the baby of the family, and it's obvious that he's my mom's favorite. Unlike me, Jake never had to hustle for things. He's the kind of guy who's coasted through life, never held down a steady job for more than a few months, didn't finish college, and has no real career prospects. To make things more complicated, he has a medical condition that prevents him from having kids. I know this has been hard on him, and I do feel for him in that sense, but honestly, he hasn't put much effort into making a life for himself either. Mom's always been his safety net. She's helped him with everything from rent to bills, even paying for vacations, to cheer him up. And while I get that she's trying to support him, it's created this unspoken expectation that Jake can lean on her forever. Meanwhile, I'm over here paying my own bills and fixing up my house on weekends, which I guess makes me the successful one, even though, to me, it just feels like being responsible. Now, here's where things take a turn. About 2 months ago, my mom shows up at my place out of the blue. I was in the middle of sanding down my kitchen cabinets, covered in dust, sweaty, not exactly looking like someone who wants company. She sits down on my couch and starts with this whole speech about family sacrifice and how, sometimes, we have to give up things for the people we love. I'm just nodding along, not really thinking much of it, figuring she's going to ask for a loan or maybe help with a bill for Jake. This kind of thing isn't totally unusual. But then, out of nowhere, she drops a bombshell. Jake needs a stable place to live, and I think it's time for you to give him your house. I just sat there, staring at her, waiting for her to start laughing, to say she was kidding or something. But no, she's dead serious. She goes on to explain how Jake deserves a fresh start, and how he can't do that living in a small apartment with bad neighbors or whatever. According to her, my house is just perfect for him, and since I'm doing well with a steady job and no family obligations, it only makes sense that I should help out and give Jake the house. I asked her, where am I supposed to go then, and she actually shrugged. She says something like, oh, you can always rent a place for a while, you're doing well enough. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had worked years for this house, skipped vacations, put off buying new clothes, even went without a car for a while just so I could save up to buy it. I wasn't about to give it up like a hand-me-down. So, I tried to reason with her, explaining that this was my home, my sanctuary, and I'd worked really hard for it. But she wasn't having it. She went on and on about how Jake was going through a tough time, and that it was my duty as his big brother to look after him. I reminded her that Jake was a grown man, and if he wanted a stable place to live, he could start by holding down a job and saving up just like I did. Mom didn't take that well. She got this tight, disappointed look on her face and started going off about how I didn't understand Jake's struggles, and that it was easy for me to judge from my comfortable position. She said Jake had different challenges, and implied that my success somehow meant I owed him, as if my achievements had come at his expense. I tried to stay calm, but it was getting hard. I asked her why she thought it was okay to suggest that I should hand over my house, the place I'd worked so hard for, while Jake hadn't shown much interest in bettering his situation. She started getting defensive, saying things like, family means we have each other's backs, and that I should care enough to help. So I asked the big question, why does helping always mean I have to sacrifice something, but Jake doesn't have to change a thing? Mom didn't have a real answer for that. She just kind of floundered, then changed tactics, reminding me of the times she helped me when I was younger, like covering my car insurance once when I was in college and low on cash. I'll admit she's done things like that, but that's what parents usually do, right? Besides, I never expected or demanded anything from her. I hustled for what I have now, and I figured she'd respect that. But in her eyes, everything was just another reason why I should do the right thing and hand over my home. The whole conversation turned into a bizarre guilt trip. Mom started telling me how Jake has always looked up to me, which was news to me, and how he just needs a chance. According to her, my house would be that chance. It was honestly surreal. She went on to say that, since I don't have a family of my own, I don't really need a big house like mine. She even threw in a few lines about how she'd love to see Jake happy and settled and that giving him my house would mean so much to her. It was like she was trying every angle she could think of. I finally told her that, while I felt for Jake and understood he'd had challenges, I wasn't willing to just give up my home. I said I could try to help him find an affordable place if that was really the issue. But she scoffed, telling me I was missing the point. She made it clear that anything short of handing over my house would be a disappointment to her. I was honestly exhausted after that. It felt like my family had turned this whole thing into some weird morality test, like giving up my house was the only way to prove I cared about them. I thought maybe if I took a few days to cool off, they'd do the same, and we could all just move past it. But no. A couple of days later, I was outside working on my yard when I heard someone at my front door. I turned around, and there was Jake, standing there with a couple of duffel bags like he'd just come from the bus station. He gave me this half-hearted smile and said, "Mom told me you changed your mind and said I could stay here for a while." I could feel my patience snap. I told him, flat out, that I'd said no to Mom, and I hadn't changed my mind. I reminded him that I had offered to help him find a place, but moving into my home wasn't happening. At first, he looked surprised, and then his face twisted in this hurt, betrayed expression that honestly almost got to me. He started going on about how he thought I was different, that I was the one person he thought he could count on. He kept going, saying he felt like he'd been abandoned by everyone, and now me too. I stayed firm, though. I told him that I wanted him to be okay, but this wasn't the way. He could work, find his own place, and start taking responsibility. If he really wanted to change things, he'd have to do it himself. But he just shook his head and mumbled something about how he should have known I'd turn my back on him too. I figured that was the end of it. Jake left, clearly upset, but there wasn't much else I could say to him. But later that night, I got a call from my mom again, and she was furious. She said Jake had shown up back at her house in tears, saying I'd kicked him out and made him feel like he was nothing. She accused me of being heartless and of humiliating my brother when all he'd wanted was a little help. At that point, I was honestly at a loss. It felt like no matter what I did, it was never enough. I tried to explain, yet again, that I wasn't going to hand over my house, that Jake had to figure things out on his own, and that I'd offered plenty of ways to support him that didn't involve giving up my home. But she wouldn't hear it. Mom kept going, saying things like, "You'll regret this when you're older," and "You're going to lose your family over something as small as a house." Finally, I told her that I needed them to stop pushing me on this or I'd have no choice but to cut contact. She got quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Fine, if that's how you feel, maybe you should go live your own life without us." Then she hung up. I stood there, staring at my phone, trying to process the fact that my mom had just threatened to disown me over a house. It hurt, but there was a part of me that felt relieved. Maybe it was finally time for a clean break. After that call, things went quiet for a while. No texts, no surprise visits, just silence. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally understood that I wasn't going to cave in. A small part of me even hoped that this could be a reset for us, that they might start respecting my boundaries and that we could rebuild some kind of normal relationship. But, as you might have guessed, that was just wishful thinking. A week later, it all blew up again. I got home from work one day to find my mom, Jake, and my stepdad all waiting on my front porch. They were sitting there, arms crossed, looking like they were staging some sort of intervention. As soon as I got out of my car, my mom jumped up and started in on me. "We've been talking as a family," she said, "and we think it's time you stop being so selfish and do what's right." I was already exhausted from work, so I took a deep breath and told them, again, that my answer hadn't changed. Jake wasn't moving into my house, and that was final. But instead of leaving, they just doubled down. My stepdad, who's usually the quiet one, actually stepped up and told me I was tearing the family apart. He said I was prioritizing money and material things over the people who should matter most. He even threw in some line about how I'd owe him for the help they'd given me back when I was younger. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was standing in front of the very house I'd worked my butt off to afford, being told by my own family that I didn't deserve to keep it. I tried to reason with them one last time, telling them that I wasn't being selfish, I was setting a boundary. I reminded them that I'd offered Jake help, just not in the way they wanted. But my mom wouldn't have it. She went on about how this was a test of character, and how she thought I'd be more compassionate. Then, Jake stepped in, looking genuinely hurt, and said, "Why do you hate me so much, man? Why are you so eager to see me fail?" He kept going, saying things like, "If you had just been there for me, maybe things would be different." It stung, honestly. I'd never wanted to see him fail. I just wanted him to step up and take responsibility for his own life. I finally reached my breaking point. I told them that if they couldn't accept my decision, then maybe we needed some serious space. I said I'd be happy to keep in touch if they could respect my boundaries, but if they were going to keep pushing, then I didn't see how we could have a healthy relationship. My mom just shook her head and said, "You're making a mistake." Then, without another word, they all walked off my porch and got into their car. Watching them drive away, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. I knew that I'd probably just burned my last bridge with them, but at that moment, I also felt like I'd finally taken control of my life. But things weren't over. Over the next few days, they started showing up every single day. It was like they were staging a protest outside my house, and I felt like a prisoner in my own home. Every single day, either my mom, Jake, or even my stepdad would show up, waiting to talk about the house. They'd sit on my porch, ring the doorbell, or camp out across the street in their car, hoping I'd eventually give in. At first, I tried ignoring them, thinking they'd eventually take the hint and stop. But they only got more determined. One morning, I woke up to the sound of Mom and Jake talking on my front steps, coffee in hand, as if they were just waiting for me to give them the green light. When I confronted them, they looked at me like I was the one being unreasonable. Mom said things like, "This isn't how we raised you to treat family," and, "Putting things over people isn't right." Jake played the victim, saying he should have known I didn't care. It was infuriating. When they couldn't get through to me in person, they started leaving guilt-tripping letters. Mom's letters were emotional, all about family loyalty, while Jake swung between pleading and accusing me of being selfish. I was exhausted. Every time I came home, I'd see them waiting, or find another note in the mailbox. They wouldn't stop until they got what they wanted, and it was turning my sanctuary into a battleground. Finally, one night, as they sat outside my house yet again, I realized this would never end unless I made it end. That night, I made the hardest decision of my life. I would sell the house and get out of their reach, even if it meant moving across the country. It was the only way to get my peace back and escape the constant siege on my home and sanity. Once I'd made the decision, I didn't waste any time. I contacted a real estate agent the very next day and started the process of putting my house on the market. It was surreal. This home that I'd worked so hard for, that I'd poured time and effort into, was about to be listed. But as strange as it felt, it was also a huge relief. I kept reminding myself that this was the only way to truly break free from my family's pressure. I didn't tell anyone about the sale, not even my closest friends. I knew that if my family caught wind of it before the sale went through, they'd double down on the pressure, and I wasn't up for another round of guilt trips and accusations. I went about my days like nothing had changed, quietly packing boxes in the evenings and sorting through what I'd take with me, what I'd donate, and what I'd leave behind. It didn't take long for an offer to come in, way above my asking price, too. Housing demand was up, and the house was in good shape from all the work I'd put into it. Accepting the offer felt like crossing the finish line in a marathon. Within a few days, I was signing papers and planning my move out of state. I chose a city far enough away that dropping by wouldn't be possible, and I started looking into setting up a new business there, hoping for a fresh start. But as luck would have it, just as I was finalizing the sale, my mom found out. She must have driven by and noticed the "for sale" sign in the yard because I got a call from her almost immediately. She was furious, saying I'd betrayed the family by selling out from under them. She accused me of abandoning them, of punishing Jake for needing help, and said I'd regret my selfish choices one day. I calmly told her I was moving to start a new chapter and that this decision had nothing to do with Jake, it was about my own peace and boundaries. But she wouldn't hear it. She kept saying how disappointed she was, how she thought I was better than this. She even suggested that I should cancel the sale, as if backing out would somehow repair all the damage. I stood firm. I told her this was final, and that I hoped one day she could understand why I needed to do this. When she realized she couldn't talk me out of it, she hung up on me. After Mom hung up on me, I figured that would be it, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Within hours, my phone was blowing up with messages and calls from my family. My stepdad sent a long text about family obligations and how I was making a huge mistake by leaving. Jake, of course, was furious. His texts were a mix of anger and desperation, saying things like, "I can't believe you're really doing this to me," and "This is why you'll always be alone, you don't care about anyone but yourself." I knew responding wouldn't help, so I ignored the messages and kept packing. The next day, they escalated even further. Mom showed up at my door, banging and yelling, demanding to be let in so we could talk about this like adults. She was relentless, saying I owed it to her to at least reconsider. When I didn't answer, she started calling through the door, saying things like, "How can you just leave us behind? We're your family." It was hard to listen to, but I stayed quiet, hoping she'd leave. After about 20 minutes, she finally walked back to her car, but I knew they wouldn't stop until I was gone. Over the next few days, I finished packing and set up everything for my move. I kept the new location a secret, only sharing it with a few trusted friends. As I packed up the last of my things, there was a bittersweet feeling. I'd worked so hard to build this life, this home, and now I was leaving it all behind. But I knew it was necessary to finally break free from the constant guilt and manipulation. On moving day, I left early, before my family had a chance to show up and cause more drama. I took one last look at the house I'd worked so hard for and felt a mix of sadness and relief. I got in my car and started the drive to my new city, feeling like a huge weight had finally been lifted. But just as I crossed into my new state, I got one last text from Jake. It read, "I hope you're happy leaving your family behind. Don't expect us to be here when you finally need us." I didn't respond. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. Settling into my new life felt like a breath of fresh air. I'd found a small but cozy apartment in a vibrant neighborhood in my new city, and for the first time in years, I could truly relax. I wasn't constantly checking over my shoulder or wondering if I'd come home to find someone on my porch. The silence felt strange at first, but it quickly became something I cherished. In the first week, I focused on setting up my new business, throwing myself into planning and networking. I'd always dreamed of branching out on my own, and this move gave me the perfect chance to start fresh. I made a point to keep my social media locked down and kept my contact details private, sharing them only with a few trusted friends who understood the situation. But of course, it didn't take long for my family to try reaching out. My phone lit up with texts from my mom, mostly messages swinging between guilt trips and pleas. At first, she tried to sound understanding, "We just want to know you're okay." When I didn't respond, her tone shifted back to anger, accusing me of running away from my responsibilities. She even tried calling from unknown numbers a few times, but I blocked each one. One evening, a close friend called, saying my mom had reached out to them, asking for my new address. They didn't give her any information, but it hit me how determined she was to track me down. They told me she sounded desperate, saying things like, "He'll come to his senses eventually, and he'll need us when he does." My friend reassured me that they'd keep my location secret, but hearing that confirmed what I'd known all along, my family wasn't willing to let go. As I focused on settling into my new life, their calls and messages gradually became less frequent, though they never fully stopped. Jake sent the occasional bitter message, always aimed at guilt-tripping me. His favorite line was, "You just abandoned your own family because of a house." Each time, I ignored it, letting it remind me why I had to make this drastic move in the first place. Slowly but surely, I found peace. My business was gaining momentum, and I was making new friends, people who knew me for me, without all the baggage from my family's expectations. For the first time, I felt like I was living on my own terms. It wasn't easy, but each day I felt more certain that I'd made the right choice. With each passing day, their grip on me weakened. It was strange, but in the quiet of my new life, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Months passed, and the sense of peace I felt only deepened. The calls and messages from my family dwindled down to the occasional email, which I mostly ignored or skimmed over, only to reassure myself there was nothing urgent. Life felt genuinely mine again. I'd built a routine, my business was doing well, and I'd even made a few close friends in the area who had no idea about the drama I'd left behind. For the first time, I felt free of the weight I'd carried for so long. Then, one evening, I got an email from my mom. It was long, and I could tell she'd put a lot of thought into it. She admitted, in a way I hadn't expected, that maybe she'd pushed too hard, that her need to help Jake had blinded her to what she was asking of me. She wrote that she missed me, that she hoped I'd reconsider staying in touch because, no matter what, you're still my son. I sat with her email for a long time. I felt a mix of emotions, relief, anger, and a strange sense of sadness. Part of me was glad she was acknowledging the damage done, even if it was just a small step. But I wasn't ready to dive back into the chaos. I replied with a short, polite message, saying I was doing well and needed more time to heal. I left it at that. As the months continued, I stuck to my boundaries. Slowly, I let go of the guilt, the need to explain myself, and the fear of letting my family down. I was building a life that felt good, without the constant pressure and expectations. I knew that, maybe someday, I'd open the door to my family again, but on my terms and only if they respected the person I'd become. Looking back, I still feel a pang of sadness for the relationships that had to be cut off so I could find peace. But I wouldn't change my decision. I'd finally learned that loving family doesn't mean sacrificing myself. Now, as I look forward, I know that whatever comes next, I'm finally free to live it fully, just as I am.